or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the March 31st, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: Jerome Powell said the Fed is inclined to hold interest rates steady and look past the energy shock from the war in Iran, but will monitor price movements that could shift public expectations about the path of inflation. Major U.S. stock indexes ended mixed, with the Dow rising 0.1% and the S&P 500 and NASDAQ falling 0.4% and 0.7% respectively, extending their losing streaks. Cisco's multi-billion-dollar deal for Jethro Restaurant Depot caps a career for the 94-year-old founder who turned a Brooklyn warehouse into a U.S. food empire. Netflix is looking to expand its current 2-game NFL package to 4 games, including the league's new Thanksgiving Eve matchup. Unilever is in advanced talks to combine its food business with spice maker McCormick in a deal that would create a new food behemoth valued at roughly $60 billion, including debt. CVS Health plans to open about 60 stores in 2026, offsetting a small number of closures for a return to growth. GM will run its heavy-duty truck plant in Michigan 6 days a week, starting in June, citing strong demand for powerful pickups. Shares of Ørsted rallied as analysts grow increasingly confident that the Trump administration won't try to kill the group's wind farms on the U.S. East Coast. Antares and Ares formed a continuation fund of more than $1.7 billion to recapitalize a portfolio of private credit assets. BBVA agreed to sell the Romania unit of its Garante BBVA business to Austria's Raiffeisen for the equivalent of $680.2 million. Now for the key articles under the Worldwide section. NASA was set to launch 4 astronauts around the moon, the deepest human space flight since the final Apollo lunar landing in 1972. Trump told aides he is willing to end the U.S. military campaign against Iran, even if the Strait of Hormuz remains largely closed, likely extending Tehran's grip on the waterway and leaving a complex operation to reopen it for a later date. Days after he was ordered out of Beirut, Iran's ambassador refuses to leave, highlighting the Lebanese government's weakness. The man who rammed his vehicle into a synagogue outside Detroit this month was inspired by Hezbollah propaganda, the Federal Bureau of Investigation said. The Trump administration proposed a regulation aimed at opening 401ks and similar retirement plans to private equity and private credit. Washington State enacted a tax on income over $1 million, the latest Democratic state to levy a tax aimed squarely at the wealthy. A Russian tanker carrying 730,000 barrels of oil was set to dock in a Cuban port, bringing some relief to the fuel-starved island. TSA officers are getting their pay again after more than 5 weeks of working without pay because of a funding impasse. Russia expelled a British diplomat accusing the person of spying, an allegation that the UK rejected. The Trump administration sued Minnesota and its school athletics governing body, carrying out a threat to punish the state for allowing transgender athletes to compete in girls' sports. The picture on today's front page takes place inside an airport where customers are very orderly in rather sparse lines. And that caption reads, "Cleared for the approach." Transportation Security Administration workers were paid again Monday after 5 weeks without their checks in the Homeland Security funding standoff. Lines at Reagan Airport in Washington were noticeably shorter. And the headline, "With TSA pay restored, airport chaos eases." Other articles from the front page follow. Trump looks to exit with Strait still closed. Goal is to limit Iran war to a few weeks. Reopening passage could come later. By Alexander Ward and Meredith McGraw. Washington. President Trump told aides he is willing to end the U.S. military campaign against Iran, even if the Strait of Hormuz remains largely closed, administration officials said, likely extending Tehran's firm grip on the waterway and leaving a complex operation to reopen it for a later date. In recent days, Trump and his aides assessed that a mission to pry open the choke point would push the conflict beyond his timeline of 4 to 6 weeks. He decided that the U.S. should achieve its main goals of hobbling Iran's navy and its missile stocks and wind down current hostilities while pressuring Tehran diplomatically to resume the free flow of trade. If that fails, Washington would press allies in Europe and the Persian Gulf to take the lead on reopening the strait, the officials said. There are also military options the president could decide on, but those aren't his immediate priority, they said. Over the past month, Trump has expressed various opinions in public on how to handle the strait, part of a larger pattern of giving conflicting goals and objectives of the war overall. He has at times threatened to bomb civilian energy infrastructure if the waterway isn't reopened by a certain date. On other occasions, he has played down the importance of the strait to the U.S. and said its closure is a problem for other nations to solve. Trump said on Monday the U.S. would destroy Iranian energy sites and water infrastructure if discussions with a new and more reasonable regime didn't amount to a deal and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. The president posted the comments on social media after Iran said it considered the U.S.'s 15-point peace plan to be largely made up of excessive, unrealistic, and unreasonable demands. The longer the strait remains closed, the more it will roil the global economy and boost gas prices. Multiple countries, including U.S. allies, are reeling from the downturn in energy supply that once flowed freely through the choke point. Industries that rely on items such as fertilizer to grow food or helium to make computer chips are suffering from shortages. Without a swift return to safe passage for energy exports, Tehran will continue to threaten world trade until the U.S. and its partners either negotiate a deal or forcibly end the crisis, analysts say. OpenAI saw Sora as its next hit, but it became a costly mistake. CEO Altman shut the video generation project, blindsiding backers at Disney. By Berber Jin and Jessica Tunkel. When Sam Altman arrived in Los Angeles to attend Vanity Fair's Oscar after party earlier this month, his company was just weeks away from being able to license its Sora video generation tools to Hollywood studios. After the smash success of ChatGPT, Sora was hyped as AI's next consumer-friendly frontier, a simple app that allowed users to put themselves and their friends in whatever video settings they choose, from dribbling like the Harlem Globetrotters to clashing lightsabers with Darth Vader. Disney's Bob Iger signed on to the vision, agreeing to have his company invest $1 billion in OpenAI and allowing the studio's Marvel, Pixel, and other characters to appear in Sora videos. Just as importantly, he put Disney's imprimatur behind the nascent technology amid widespread fears about protecting the industry's creative work from AI. Then, OpenAI abruptly decided to shut Sora down. Disney executives, many of whom learned about the decision less than an hour before it was announced, were shocked. What they didn't know was that Sora had quietly turned into a liability for OpenAI in the months after its release, particularly as the startup tightened its focus ahead of a looming IPO. OpenAI was weeks away from finishing work on a new AI model, code-named Spud, and needed to free up more computing resources to power the coding and enterprise products that would run on it. AI chips are the most precious commodity at any leading research lab, and at OpenAI, Sora was eating up far too many. The product wasn't profitable, and every user who spliced themselves into a Hollywood chase scene drew down a finite resource. Sora now looks like an expensive, strategic miscalculation, one that was led by key employees who were at the center of the AI talent war raging across Silicon Valley. Altman represented the move as a difficult but necessary sacrifice toward the company's larger goals. The decision marked a stunning end to a project that Altman once dreamed would turn OpenAI into the creative pioneer of the AI era and could have been a lucrative new source of revenue. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Powell, Fed looks past oil for now, by Nick Timiraeus. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell said Monday the central bank is inclined to hold rates steady and look past the energy shock from the war in Iran, but cautioned that it might not be able to sit on the sidelines if rising prices shift the public's expectations about inflation over time. Powell, speaking to students at Harvard University, laid out the textbook case for patience. Energy disruptions tend to be short-lived, and monetary policy works too slowly to counteract them in real time. He added a critical caveat, however, by noting how 5 years of above-target inflation made it harder to assume the public would simply shrug off another round of rising prices. You can have a series of these supply shocks, and that can lead the public generally, businesses, price setters, households, to start expecting higher inflation over time. Why wouldn't they? Powell said. The dilemma for the Fed is that an energy shock can simultaneously push prices higher and drag down economic growth by squeezing household budgets and raising costs for businesses. That leaves policymakers weighing whether to give priority to fighting inflation or cushioning the economy, well aware that the standard tools for solving one problem may make the other worse. Powell tiptoed away from saying how the Fed would answer that riddle. Quote, "We will eventually maybe face the question of what to do here. We're not really facing it yet because we don't know what the economic effects will be," he said. Prices for treasuries had rallied before Powell spoke with investors, unwinding earlier bets that higher energy costs might lead the Fed's next move to be a rate hike. Bond yields fall when prices rise. Nothing in Powell's remarks reversed that move. Cisco bets $29 billion on supplier to small restaurants. By Lauren Thomas and Amira McGee. Cisco's nearly $30 billion deal for Jethro Restaurant Depot is the food services behemoth's bid to expand into mom-and-pop restaurants, a market that Restaurant Depot's 94-year-old founder grew from a Brooklyn warehouse into a U.S. food empire. Under the terms of the deal struck Monday, Restaurant Depot shareholders will receive $21.6 billion in cash and 91.5 million Cisco shares, a total deal value of $29.1 billion, including debt, represents a multiple of more than 14 times Restaurant Depot's operating income, the company said. For Cisco, which distributes food and other supplies to schools, restaurants, healthcare facilities, hotels, and other establishments around the world, the acquisition helps the company expand into the high margin and growing cash and carry distribution model. Founded in 1976 as Jethro Cash and Carry, Restaurant Depot offers small restaurant owners and other independent businesses free memberships, allowing them to visit one of the company's warehouses anytime to pick up food supplies that same day. It cuts out the middleman and offers more affordable prices. Nathan Natty Kirsch built the company into a leading brand that dominates the restaurant supply market. How a Nobel winner helped score record pay for WNBA Union by Rachel Bachman and Justin Lahart. After Claudia Golden became the first woman to win a solo Nobel in economics in 2023, she received hundreds of invitations and requests. She accepted just 3. One of them was advising the WNBA Players Union as the women prepared to negotiate a new labor deal with the league. When Golden replied via email to Terry Carmichael Jackson, executive director of the Players Union, "I remember just reading it and screaming," Jackson said. Golden had one requirement. She refused to be paid. This month, the two sides reached a collective bargaining agreement that gave Women's National Basketball Association players a nearly 400% raise. Starting this season, players' average salary will top $580,000. It isn't just the biggest pay increase in U.S. league history. It is, as far as Golden is aware, the biggest increase any union anywhere has ever negotiated. It's astounding, the 79-year-old Harvard economist said. There's more work and no perks, but at least the vibes are bad. Workers say cost cuts and AI are stripping the joy out of office life. Feels like a funeral. By Mark Maurer and Chip Cutter. For employees at a Dell Technologies office, mornings used to start with a tiny dose of joy. The office coffee machines doled out free daily espresso shots, a small perk that workers relished. Then came the buzzkill. Last year, the company started charging staffers a fee every time they used the machine. The cost, while small, felt like what one worker described as the cherry on top of a demoralizing work culture beset by layoffs and overwhelming workloads. Honestly, it feels like a funeral in the office right now, said the employee who pointed out the coffee was just okay. Dell said it is committed to supporting the well-being of its workforce. The coffee squeeze is emblematic of a broader malaise sweeping office life at American companies, which appear to be in a race to find inefficiencies and cut cost. The curtailing of perks, from off-sites to travel, is happening against the backdrop of an artificial intelligence push that employees say seems aimed at squeezing more work out of fewer people. The upshot, many employees say, is that work has been stripped of fun, leaving the front page for other articles within the paper. Did Duke basketball just get Leitnered? By Jason Gay. Let's get right to the only question that matters. Did Luke get Leitnered? As in, was Duke's epic last-second loss to UConn Sunday, the Blue Devils fumbling the ball at midcourt, the Huskies recovering and finding freshman Braylon Mullins for a game-winning three-pointer, the spiritual equivalent of what happened 34 years ago in the 1992 Elite Eight, when Duke's Christian Laettner, the most polarizing player on Earth's most polarizing college team, took a long pass, dribbled, spun, and sunk Kentucky at the buzzer. Yes-ish and no-ish. I'd argue no on this specific shot-to-shot comparison, mainly because it was Duke, Kentucky, not Duke, UConn, but also because college basketball doesn't have the cultural heft like it did back then. Today's game is far too transitory and transactional, its highlights less iconic. Rule would open private markets to 401ks. White House aims to curb lawsuits that discourage giving workers more options. By Ann Tergeson and Dylan Tokar. The Trump administration proposed a regulation on Monday that is intended to open 401ks and similar retirement plans to private equity and private credit. It is a victory for the Wall Street firms that have lobbied to get these higher-cost alternative investments into the $14.2 trillion 401k market, but it comes at an inopportune time for the industry, as investors pull money from some private credit funds. The proposed regulation by the Labor Department aims to curb the litigation that dissuades employers from broadening their 401k investment menus beyond the typical mix of stock and bond funds. It could usher in new openness among employers to consider alternative investments, from private credit to infrastructure funds, though adoption is likely to be relatively slow given the gradual pace of change in the 401k market. Private market fund managers argue that regular investors should have access to assets that have long been restricted to pensions, endowments, and the wealthy, especially in an era in which there are fewer publicly traded companies to invest in. Treasury officials, including Secretary Scott Bessent, wanted to make sure the regulations didn't make it easy for fund managers to saddle 401k holders with underperforming investments, according to people familiar with the matter. The concerns were heightened as sentiment around the previously booming private credit industry began to sink. Bessent said in February that the Treasury was working with the Labor Department on the rule to ensure that, if there is something rotten, it is not going to be handed to the individual investors. Artemis II crew set to go around the moon. Lunar flyby to be the deepest humans have traveled in space in half a century. By Micah Maidenberg. While the Artemis II mission will be the first time in more than half a century that an American spacecraft has circled the moon, Commander Reed Wiseman's 3 flight colleagues will be making several space flight firsts of their own. Jeremy Hansen's trip around the moon will be his first trip in space. Hansen will also be the first Canadian to fly beyond near-Earth orbits. Additionally, Christina Cook will be the first woman, and Victor Glover the first African American to reach beyond Earth's orbits. It's go time for the highest stakes mission at NASA in more than 50 years. On Wednesday, the agency is set to launch 4 astronauts around the moon, the deepest human space flight since the final Apollo lunar landing in 1972. The launch window for Artemis 2, as the mission is called, opens at 6:24 p.m. Eastern Time. National Aeronautics and Space Administration teams have been preparing the vehicles to depart from Florida's Kennedy Space Center on the roughly 10-day trip. Reed Wiseman, the NASA astronaut serving as mission commander, said he doesn't fear taking the voyage. A widower, he does worry about his daughters. I could have a very comfortable life for them, Wiseman said in a September interview. But I'm also a human, and I see the spirit in their eyes that is burning in my soul too. And so we've just got to never stop going. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Continuing the article from yesterday, it was called The Weekend Interview with Harmeet Dillon, Trump's Civil Rights Enforcer in Action, by Tunku Varadarajan. She is the nation's top civil rights enforcer, and few occupants in her office have had as high a public profile as she does, including close to 1.6 million followers on social media. Yesterday, this very long article was concerned about DEI bias and campus anti-Semitism. He especially tackled the DEI bias in medical schools and said, quote, "When a person needs an ER doctor, no sane person stops to ask about the doctor's race." Another point from yesterday was the entire voting rights section of the Civil Rights Division has been weaponized to prevent states from improving their voting laws and making it easier to vote. She came to the United States from India when she was a child and was raised in Durham, North Carolina, in the Sikh religion. Fittingly, religious freedom has been another of her priorities. Continuing with the article, another issue that energizes Miss Dillon is aggressive police consent decrees, legally binding settlements between the Justice Department and local police departments that compel the latter to pursue or avoid certain practices. These micromanagerial consent decrees mandate training and other things that go well beyond the scope of the statutes we enforce, she says. But we've had the most liberal group of lawyers in America working in the Civil Rights Division, and they have had the boot of the United States on the neck of police departments throughout our country for over a decade. Consent decrees are not only oppressive to cops, but bad for citizens, Miss Dillon says. There's something called the Ferguson effect, named for the Missouri city where riots ensued in 2014 after the shooting of Michael Brown, a black man, by a police officer. A Missouri grand jury declined to hand up an indictment of the officer, and Barack Obama's Justice Department cleared him of civil rights violations. Every time there's a consent decree against an American police department, crime rises. The cost of policing rises, and police retire and move to adjoining jurisdictions that aren't under these requirements, Miss Dillon says. Some consent decrees are 100 pages long. They minutely make the lives of the police miserable. They have to fill out a mountain of additional forms. There's record keeping on whether police sniffer dogs are biting blacks versus whites at a disproportionate rate. Her division has reviewed a slew of police consent decrees and has successfully petitioned judges to dismiss 2 in Minneapolis and Louisville, Kentucky. Investigations have also been closed in Phoenix, Trenton, New Jersey, Memphis, Tennessee, Mount Vernon, New York, and Oklahoma City. Some of these were based on complete junk science and a selective cherry picking of statistics, Miss Dillon says. The change of which Miss Dillon is proudest is the establishment of a Second Amendment section. The Second Amendment is an important civil rights, she said. I certainly was introduced to it as a young kid growing up in rural North Carolina, where my dad worked as a doctor. We had the Ku Klux Klan in our town, and so my mom and dad both had pistols and learned how to shoot. My brother and I learned how to use rifles. After Mr. Trump's second election, there was a jump ball at the department as to where the Second Amendment section was going to be. I said, it's a civil right. It should be in the Civil Rights Division. I advocated hard for that and got it. She declines to say who else contended for it because it would put others in an awkward position. In September, the division sued the Los Angeles County Sheriff Department, alleging unconstitutional delays in processing concealed carry weapon permits, the first Justice Department lawsuit in support of gun owners. LA County is taking 3 years to issue permits, Miss Dillon fumes. In the wake of Heller and Bruin, Supreme Court rulings from 2008 and 2022, respectively, the law says that there's a small issue regime in the United States, meaning that states are constitutionally obligated to issue permits to qualified applicants. They were just ignoring it. The Second Amendment is not a second-class right, she says, illustrating the point with an analogy. Pretend it's the First Amendment and pretend you want to have a protest next week. And unfortunately, LA County only has one part-time administrator who processes your permit applications, and he grants it 3 years from now. That is not a right that is effectively being enjoyed by you. Virginia, Miss Dillon warns, could face a similar lawsuit if Governor Abigail Spanberger signs a package of radical gun laws on her desk that the Virginia legislature just passed. If she signs it, it'll be ripe for us to challenge. Miss Dillon hasn't been shy of high-profile lawsuits, targeting Harvard University this month for failing to curb anti-Semitism on campus and to protect the rights of Jewish students. She acknowledges that she is singling out Harvard to make it an example. Quote, yes, it's bang for the buck. Harvard is receiving $2 billion plus in federal funding. The smaller institutions are not. Harvard is a thought leader, disproportionately influential and global. Unlike Columbia, she contends Harvard hasn't negotiated with honest intentions. Quote, Harvard sued us. Harvard stonewalled us on document requests to which we were entitled. Harvard is defiant, and they've wasted time with settlement negotiations that I believe were not in good faith. End of quote. Although her division is far from fully staffed, Miss Dillon says she is making up its lawyers' shortfall with numerous hires from private firms. The private sector mentality, to be very frank, is very different from the public sector mentality. People barely work in government. There were lawyers working on some of the police consent decrees for years. I don't even know what they did. I get 10 things done in the time that some of these people took to do one. Her new hires are taking pay cuts of 70% to 80% to work in the Civil Rights Division, she says. They're getting great experience. They're serving their country. A bunch of dead weight that was doing nothing but concocting fake cases is gone. I don't know how they're going to cope in the wild. Her closest colleagues all came from private law firms. I've brought the private sector mentality into the heart of government, into the heart, in fact, of the Civil Rights Division. Harmeet Dillon spells her last name capital D-H-I-L-L-O-N. From today's editorial page, Trump's Iran target list, good and bad. Hitting desalination and power plants would hurt the Iranian people. President Trump is whipsawing in his familiar fashion between hailing diplomacy with Iran and issuing new threats if peace talks fail. He's also issued a new and broader target list, but some of the possible sites he mentions would do more harm to the Iranian people than to the regime. Great progress has been made in negotiations, but if for any reason a deal is not shortly reached, Mr. Trump posted on Truth Social Monday morning, we will conclude our lovely stay in Iran by blowing up and completely obliterating all of their electric generating plants, oil wells, and Karg Island, and possibly all desalination plants. It's hard to know when Mr. Trump is serious, but this target list is far too indiscriminate. Oil production and the Karg Island oil export terminal are fair military game, as they are the main sources of financing for the regime. The decision to bomb or occupy them with U.S. troops is a matter of military calculation and judgment about the risks. Oddly, though, Mr. Trump has so far let Iran's tankers full of oil pass through the Gulf and to China or other buyers without interference. He even hailed one group of tankers as a gift to the U.S., presumably to keep global oil prices from spiking too high. But if he really wants to squeeze the regime, cutting off its oil exports may be necessary. The same isn't true of bombing Iran's electric power or desalination plants, which serve civilian more than military needs. These would punish the Iranian people the U.S. needs on its side against the regime once the bombing stops. Tehran already had a water shortage before the war, owing to the regime's mismanagement. Bombing desalination plants would let the regime blame the U.S. for the shortages, in addition to causing far more humanitarian hardship. The same goes for bombing Iran's electricity production. Iranians without electricity or water would soon need external supplies or become refugees to neighboring countries and beyond. This would win no friends in the region when the U.S. is trying to get them to support the war. Stories of civilian deprivation could also turn public opinion in the U.S. even further against the war. Mr. Trump's indiscriminate target list echoes World War II's civilian bombing against German and Japanese cities. But this isn't the 1940s, when the war's traumas could be somewhat sequestered. One of the great benefits of precision bombing technology is that it lets the U.S. military target the enemy with limited civilian damage. This is a moral advance in warfare and distinguishes the American way of war from, say, Vladimir Putin's. Sometimes mistakes still kill civilians, as may have happened when a school was inadvertently hit during the first days of the war. But that's a far cry from the deliberate destruction of civilian targets. Let's hope someone in Mr. Trump's War Council will explain the difference and have him stick to regime targets. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the opinion pages, why not declare war? Congress hasn't done it since 1942, but a case may emerge for doing it in Iran. By Walter Russell Mead. Never, 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 Winston Churchill wrote in my early life, believe any war will be smooth and easy, or that anyone who embarks on that strange voyage can measure the tides and hurricanes he will encounter. The statesman who yields to war fever is no longer the master of policy, but the slave of unforeseeable and uncontrollable events. 1 month into his war with Iran, Donald Trump is learning how right Churchill was. As the economic and political consequences of the widening war ripple across the world, President Trump confronts a complex set of difficult choices. How does he respond to growing Russian targeting assistance to Iran? What should he do if Houthi missiles and drones close the Red Sea again, exacerbating the global energy shock? Should he commit U.S. ground forces to the war? For what missions and at what level of risk? Above all, how does Mr. Trump overthrow the authorities in Tehran, induce them to accept his conditions for ending the war, or spin compromise as success? Mr. Trump is as unpredictable as war itself, but he has no desire to see his statue enshrined in the history's greatest losers wing of the Temple of Fame. He knows what the Vietnam War did to Lyndon B. Johnson's presidency, and he would do anything and everything to avoid a similar fate. This doesn't necessarily mean that Tehran will soon be savoring a tasty taco fest. If the conflict continues to escalate, with growing economic cost and American casualties, Mr. Trump might respond with unconventional escalations of his own. He might, for example, press Republican legislative leaders to pass a formal declaration of war for the first time since Congress declared war on Bulgaria, Hungary, and Romania in 1942. Declarations of war unlocked vast presidential powers. Woodrow Wilson jailed war critics, put enemy aliens under tight constraints, and prohibited the dissemination of anti-war materials through the mail. Franklin D. Roosevelt interned Japanese Americans, censored the press, and essentially took over the American economy. The powers of American presidents in wartime aren't unlimited, but they are very broad. According to a 2014 Congressional Research Service report, declarations of war allow presidents to order domestic manufacturers to make munitions and to seize factories if they refuse. Powers of surveillance are greatly expanded, as is the ability to monitor and, in some cases, control the actions and speech of enemy aliens and those seen as aiding enemy nations. Of special interest to Mr. Trump, a formal declaration of war would activate the Trading with the Enemy Act, providing the kind of broad authority over international trade that the Supreme Court recently denied him under another statute. Declarations of war empower direct presidential authority over communications and transportation systems. It has been almost 84 years since Congress made an official declaration of war. President Truman did not seek a declaration of war to respond to North Korea's invasion of the South. The Tonkin Gulf Resolution, which authorized LBJ's Vietnam escalation, fell well short of a declaration of war. Similarly, President George W. Bush fought terror under an authorization for use of military force. In hindsight, one can wonder if these choices were wise. Formal declarations of war send clear signals to adversaries and strengthen the hand of a war president, especially when opponents see the manipulation of American public opinion as their key route to success. The Constitution vests war powers in Congress. While no Congress has ever rejected a presidential request for a declaration of war, we have never had a president quite like Mr. Trump. An overwhelming majority of Democrats would likely oppose granting him this kind of power under almost any circumstances. Enough Republicans, worried about possible abuses and the politics of an unpopular conflict, might join them to deny a request for a formal war declaration. But the politics could change. If the economic pain of war grows, if anti-war protesters become the object of a backlash, or if Iranian attacks on American targets raise public ire against Tehran, very small shifts in public opinion could provide the administration with the backing to get a declaration of war through Congress. In any case, Mr. Trump might enjoy forcing his opponents to vote against granting him war powers while American forces are taking casualties overseas. Wars can be transformational, especially in volatile eras like the present. As the Iran war intensifies, Americans cannot assume that its transformational consequences will be confined to foreign lands. It is not only statesmen who lose control of events when the dogs of war run free. Letters to the editor, the topic, the Abraham Accords passed the stress test. Regarding Yusuf al-Atabi's op-ed, the UAE stands up to Iran, March 26. Much of the commentary on the United Arab Emirates' response to Iranian strikes has focused on immediate military and financial measures. But the deeper story is what this moment reveals about the Abraham Accords. Critics argue that the Accords are transactional and shallow, photo ops dressed up as diplomacy. The war has revealed something different. Israel and the United Arab Emirates have been sharing early warning data, coordinating air defense protocols, and building defense industrial ties. The UAE's integration with Israeli systems under the United States Central Command isn't the product of crisis improvisation. It's the fruit of years of patient institutional work. What this means for the day after is significant. If and when the fighting stops, the UAE won't return to a posture of studied ambiguity toward Israel. It will be a country that absorbed a barrage of Iranian strikes, stood firm, and deepened its alignment with Jerusalem in the process. That's a different relationship than when the Accords were signed in 2020. What comes next could be extraordinary. Defense cooperation is already underway. A post-war environment with Iran degraded creates the conditions to go further with joint infrastructure, integrated financial markets, and a technology corridor. The Abraham Accords were always a bet on the future. The UAE is demonstrating the commitment that will be needed to get us there. By Judah Taub, Jerusalem, Mr. Taub is founder and managing partner of Hetz Ventures, former Israeli intelligence officer, and advisor to governments on AI, cybersecurity, and defense strategy. The Pepper and Salt cartoon shows a man at his desk with a computer monitor showing, and next to his desk is an empty waste paper basket surrounded by wads of paper. And the man coming into his office states, "This is why you're here and not in the NBA." You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the March 31st, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening, and have a wonderful evening or day. And remember, tomorrow is April Fool's Day.
You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Volunteer radio readers broadcast daily readings, 24 hours a day, of newspapers, magazines, books, and other printed matter to area people who are blind or have a print disability, who are provided reading radios. The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service has broadcast almost 40 years of radio readings to